Um, Let me just say where we are and who this is. My name is Hannah Nordhaus, and I'm interviewing Dr. Robert McFarland. It is May 19th, and we are at his house in Boulder. Let us begin. If you could tell me when and where you were born to start with.
I was born in Ames, Iowa on September 18th, 1929.
Okay. And did you grow up in Iowa?
Yes, I finished high school in Ames. I graduated from Kenyon College in Ohio. Then I graduated from the University of Iowa Medical School in 1954.
And when did you move to Colorado?
I moved here in 1959, and I did some residency work at the medical school in Denver and moved to Boulder in '61.
And what kind of medicine did you practice?
My specialty was internal medicine. I've been retired for 10 years.
And you had a private practice?
Yes.
Okay. And how about your parents? What did they do for work?
My father and grandfather were both physicians. When my son started college, he flunked chemistry, and he said, "Now I don't have to go to medical school." He ended up going to osteopathic medical school 5 years later, so there's a long family tradition. My mother had been a school teacher, and my sister got a PhD in library science. She ran the science library at Syracuse University.
Okay. So it sounds like you were destined for medicine.
Yeah, I never thought much about anything else.
Okay. Did you serve in the military?
Well, yes, I had been deferred during the Korean War because I was going to medical school, but I then owed them 2 years, so I went in the Navy in 1955 and did my 2 years of active duty. I had such a good time that I stayed in the reserve for another 20 years.
Really?
Yeah. So I'm now getting a pension from the Navy.
That's nice. Where did you serve when you were?
Well, first I was sent to Hawaii, stationed at a Marine base, and that was pretty dull. And I saw in a Navy bulletin that came around that there was a course in preventive medicine at Bethesda Naval Hospital. So I signed up and was selected, which surprised me. Turned out I was the only person that applied. It was also a course to help doctors pass the boards for preventive medicine and aviation medicine, so that was the purpose of the course. But I got a good job as a result. I got to do streptococcal research at Bainbridge Naval Training Center from '56 to '57.
Okay. Are you active in the church? Leroy had told me that he...
I'm a member of St. John's Episcopal Church. I was on the vestry once many years ago. I still go pretty regularly.
Well, let's move on to Rocky Flats then, unless you have any other information that you think is pertinent. How did you learn about Rocky Flats?
Oh, I don't remember. You know, I moved here in '61, and it was just there. You know, I think I saw people who worked there as patients, and it's just a part of the community.
Okay, so it just sort of became part of your consciousness at some point.
Right. It was no sudden event.
Okay. And when and how did you get involved with the Rocky Flats issue?
Well, in 1975, some people from California came by, and they were doing an initiative against nuclear power plants. And I and some friends from here got into that, so we collected signatures to get that on the statewide ballot. And we did that in 6 other states: California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, Oklahoma and Colorado all had votes that fall in 1976 to close nuclear power plants. Well, we lost in all 7 states. We got about 1/3 of the vote. And after that election, I met Morris Udall, who was a congressman from Arizona. His wife had divorced and moved up here with their kids, and I was her doctor, and I met Mo Udall, and he said, "We will look back on 1976 as the beginning of the end of the nuclear power industry, because Congress will not continue to subsidize something that 1/3 of the people are against." And that's what happened. It was a real eye-opener for me. There have been no more nuclear power plants begun since 1976. And in those days, they used to talk about supplying most of the country's power with nuclear power plants. We're still debating what to do about how to create electrical power, and there's a few solar-powered plants, and most of them are still coal-fired. And all the nuclear power plants that were begun are still working. So that was very exciting for me, particularly since even though we lost the election, we accomplished the goal, which, that was a real eye-opener. And I got interested in initiatives as a result of that, and I've done several others over the years, both local and state.
Mostly environmental, public health oriented?
Yeah, pretty much.
What are some of the other initiatives?
Well, sometimes my memory slips. In 1982. First, in 1980, I ran for Congress because I thought that was one of the ways to publicize the issue about Rocky Flats. And I was a Citizens Party candidate, and I got 1% of the vote, and, Colorado Congressional District number 2. And yet I accomplished the goal of getting people thinking about Rocky Flats. And so something that had been pretty much ignored began to be discussed. And then in 1982, I ran for Congress again. No, wait a minute. I helped get an initiative on the ballot in 1982 about closing Rocky Flats. No, I'm not sure what that 82 budget was. Anyways, it was some kind of an environmental issue, and we got 1/3 of the vote again, so that was what I figured was the strength of the environmental movement or the anti-nuclear movement.
Still seems to be about 1/3, I think. Let me ask you, before we move forward, when you got involved with this anti-nuclear initiative, what was the process by which the nuclear power plants became something that worried you and became a political motivator?
Well, there were a series of nuclear accidents going on in those days, and I forget the names of them all, but sometimes they'd have to close a place for repairs, and we were just beginning to wake up to the fact that there was a huge danger, because these places were going to be around for a long time, and there'd be radioactive debris that would be a problem about where to put it, and the nuclear-powered submarines were a huge improvement, so that there were certain situations where nuclear power was by far better than anything else, and we're still building those submarines, but it just seemed to me that the potential harm was so much greater than the potential benefits from generating most of the electricity from nuclear power. That's why I got down on it.
This was before 3 Mile Island, right?
Oh yeah.
And before, when you reached this point before, had you just not thought about nuclear plants, or was there the common public perception that they were perfectly safe and there was no issues?
Well, I don't remember. Nothing is perfectly safe, I mean, and so, I mean, I always knew there'd be some kind of accidents, and I'd forgotten all about 3 Mile Island. When did that occur?
I think it was 78.
Uh-huh.
It's my recollection, late 70s.
Yeah.
After.
I mean, there used to be real hype about nuclear power. Electricity would be too cheap to measure, was a common slogan, and so it wasn't hard to see that there were as many dangers as there were advantages.
Okay, back to Rocky Flats then. So you had been involved with this initiative, and at what point did your energies turn towards Rocky Flats?
Well, when I ran for Congress in 1980, that was the main issue that I kept bringing up. And you know, Rocky Flats was important, and we got a lot of good out of making nuclear weapons, but you know, we had a lot of dangers, and we still haven't seen any nuclear explosions other than Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you see. So we don't know yet how much trouble there's going to be if some country attacks another country with nuclear weapons. So that was the kind of thing that got me thinking about it, and I knew that running for Congress was the best way to publicize something.
This was against Tim Worth?
Yeah. He was pretty nervous. He'd had close elections up until then. I mean, I only got 1% of the vote, so his nervousness was completely unfounded. And we've become pretty good friends since.
This was, you contested was it the Democratic primary, or was it the general election?
The general election. I ran as a third-party candidate. Citizens Party was an attempt to start a third party, had Barry Commoner as the presidential candidate, and there'll be more attempts to start a third party. I've voted for Ralph Nader in the last 2 elections.
Okay. So, did you become involved with any of the protest organizations, or what was your subsequent involvement?
Well, we used to march out to Rocky Flats and have protest marches. That always got a pretty good coverage in the press. Somebody was just in town talking at the World Affairs Conference. I hate it because my memory is so bad, but he was a Rocky Flats protester, and he used to come to marches.
Daniel Ellsberg?
Daniel Ellsberg, right. And so I found a number of ways to try and keep the subject alive, but my first effort in in 80 was probably the most important one, and the rest of it was minor compared to that.
Your first effort in 80 being the
Running for Congress.
How did Tim Worth respond, or I don't know who the Republican candidate was, but how do you feel that your run affected the dialogue of that election? And
Oh yeah. Tim Worth got very nervous. He'd won 3 close races, you see, and he had no idea how many votes I'd collect. So he could conceive of me getting 5 or 10% of the vote and maybe beating him or something. But his opponent was a guy named John McElderry, and Tim won easily. And he later went on to be a senator, you know, because he was a good politician and people liked him. And I always liked him. I just thought that that was the best way to publicize Rocky Flats.
So was his response to, did Rocky Flats then become a bigger issue for him because of that election?
Oh yeah, he always had to pay attention to it from then on. And I got a lot of newspaper clippings from that era describing some of the things that went on in the subsequent years.
I'd love to see them later. So, did you serve on the advisory board, the Citizens Advisory Board?
No,
You didn't.
no.
What did you, I guess if you could tell me your experience of the protests of going out to the plant, and what it was like to be a part of those protests, and what you thought of the organizing tactics.
Well, basically for people not having any real experience in organizing, like union organizers, the spontaneous group that appeared did pretty well, I think, you see. Like the union was on the other side. They were, the workers' unions wanted the plant to continue, of course, and most people in the country thought we needed nuclear weapons to protect ourselves from the Russians and things like that. So it was clearly a uphill struggle to get people to see that the dangers were greater than the advantages. And, you know, I'm not sure about that. I mean, the ideal thing would have been to build the place into a much more rural area than between Boulder and Denver. But, you know, they were thinking, this is a way to attract workers, this is a nice place to live, so forth and so on. I don't think the people who were behind Rocky Flats had much concept of the dangers at that time. Some of them did, but not all of them.
Do you think that became more obvious in the 70s when these protests started? Is that about the time that people realized?
Well, yeah, I mean, 3 Mile Island and all the protests and the realization that nuclear war was going to wipe out everybody. You know, that all became evident to people. And so, you know, it was like trying to prevent mass suicide or something.
Do you have any specific memories of going out to the protests, or any stories that you recall as being particularly poignant?
No, I mean, you know, it was about a 8 or 10 mile walk out there, and that was kind of fun, but, and we had a number of notable figures join in. One of them was Bob Kerrey, who was a senator from Nebraska, I think, who was running for president in those days, and he appeared at the rally.
But do you know what year this was?
Well, that was probably 80.
80.
But maybe it was 76. I can't remember for sure.
So it was after, was it after the first big protest was the occupation of the train tracks? Is that right?
Yeah.
And that were you involved with that?
No.
So this was probably after that then?
Yeah.
How many people were in the group that walked out to Rocky Flats?
Oh, there would be anywhere from 50 to 200.
And how did you become aware that this was happening? Were people contacting you?
Oh yeah, you know, I was in a sense making myself a little notorious because of the idea of nuclear power plants, and I thought we ought to get rid of them, and then that just sort of segued into the Rocky Flats protests, and it made a difference. It took a long time, but it made a difference. And you know, now we're making nuclear weapons at Los Alamos, and you never hear a word about it anymore. So
And it's not mass production anymore, is it?
I don't know what it is, but
Okay, how did your...
they used to make 3 a day in the old days. I remember that much.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot.
Amazing. How did your medical experience or your concern about the health effects, do you feel that your medical experience gave you any particular insight into the issue?
Oh, I'm not sure. Maybe. You know, since I've been retired, I tend to not use MD after my name whenever I write my name, but people still call me doctor frequently. But I don't think it had any particular advantage. Maybe it did. I mean, I don't know. There's no way I can tell.
You never saw patients. Did you see any patients from Rocky Flats?
Well, yeah, but not with any radiological harm. I mean, I had patients who worked at Rocky Flats. I still got a pretty good friend who's working at Rocky Flats cleaning it up, and so. But I never treated any illnesses from Rocky Flats.
Were there any discussions of health concerns involving Rocky Flats?
Well, other than what was in the papers, I don't think there was much. I mean, everybody was concerned about the effects of radiation. That took 10 or 15 years to develop to where everybody got concerned about it. But it was a subject that was of fairly widespread interest. I mean, that's kind of why you're here, is that, just when they closed and moved the thing to Los Alamos, it's just like everybody's forgotten about it. You have to be a historian to be interested anymore.
It's not in our backyard anymore.
Right.
How about your religious faith? Do you think that had any influence on your involvement with Rocky Flats?
Well, I doubt it, but I'm not sure, you know. I don't even... The Quakers have sort of been heavily involved in protesting Rocky Flats, so there is a religious aspect to it, but I'm not sure that my being an Episcopalian made any difference in the way I behaved. I mean, it made some, but I don't know what. You know, it has some effect, but it's just like everything you do has some effect on what else you do.
Where did you get your information about Rocky Flats? I don't know if you're particularly steeped in the details of radiation, beryllium, stuff like that. This is a question, Leroy.
Oh, well, mostly what I knew I got out of the papers. I worked in Boston when I was a resident in pathology for a lady who was an expert in beryllium disease. But, you know, I never saw any here. And so I'm not sure that my medical experience had a whole lot to do with my effort about Rocky Flats.
Did you ever go on site at Rocky Flats?
No.
Never made it through the gates?
No.
Okay. Did you ever encounter any criticism or harassment because of your position on Rocky Flats?
Yeah, because, you know, when we started, there were a lot of people who felt we needed those weapons to keep us safe from the Russians. And so patients who would be pretty good friends would say, "Doc, I don't know why you're trying to stop Rocky Flats," you know, and things like that. I mean, but I don't know whether it was any great alteration in my practice or my career. Most people in Boulder gradually became against Rocky Flats, and so, but early on I'd get a little bit of complaint from a few people.
When you started to get involved, was it not true that most people in Boulder were against it? Was it a more...
Well, I think most people were ignoring it in 1978 and 80.
Ignoring it willfully, or because they just didn't know
Well,
what was going on out there?
I don't know. I mean, it was rarely discussed.
What did you think of the people who worked at on the inside of the plant? I'm wondering if you had, I mean, you had mentioned that you had a few patients.
Well, they were very competent people. I mean, you know, they weren't going to keep any people around there who were sloppy or dumb or anything like that. They were very capable people who were working out there.
Did you feel that there was a big political divide between Boulder and the plant people?
No, no. I mean, things gradually changed over 10 years' time, or 15, but I mean, everybody that I knew thought that nuclear weapons were very valuable for defending the country if we need be. And I don't know how much the government hyped the Russian threat. I mean, I've learned in the last 5 or 10 years that the government lies a lot, and so I don't know what they were doing in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but I mean, it's always been a tragedy that, you know, we and the Russians were allies in World War II, and then within a few years, when the North Koreans invaded South Korea in 1950, we became enemies, and it's taken a long time to get that issue resolved. And so, you know, I've been more and more a peacenik, but I can't remember anything in particular I've done, maybe signed petitions and stuff like that. The Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center is the real organizing center of peace efforts in this community, and I've gone to them recently with a new project. There's a pretty good book out by an Englishman named Hafiz Ahmed called The War on Freedom, and he gives pretty good evidence that George W. Bush, our present president, provoked the 9/11 episodes and had something to do with bringing them about in order to make his government a little more popular. Now, people are not reading that book very frequently. I don't know why yet. It hasn't had any nationwide publicity. But once that sinks in on them, there'll be a movement to impeach George Bush or defeat him in the next election. And I mean, I guess he was doing that to win the next election, but I'm just assuming that the country will catch on fast enough to prevent that.
So when you first moved to Boulder, you would say you were less of a peacenik then?
Oh yeah, I was less of a peacenik, that's for sure. And I mean, I don't even think there were many peaceniks in 1961, you know. And so when we got to where we could destroy Russia and the rest of the world in one little war, that turned me and a lot of other people into peaceniks.
Do you remember any formative, like, did you read something, or was it something about the hydrogen bomb? Was there some formative moment that made you realize that this could wipe out the entire...
Well, I don't remember any specific event, but you know, gradually I came to realize that we could wipe out all people on Earth. And I used to read a lot of scare literature, I guess. But I mean, it still annoys me that the government keeps lying to us. See, a book came out about Pearl Harbor in 1999 called Day of Deceit. A World War II Navy man who had a career in the newspaper business named Robert Stinnett, S-T-I-N-N-E-T-T, wrote this book, Day of Deceit. And I contacted him, and he came through here for the World Affairs Conference in 2000 or 2001, I guess. And he showed in his book that President Roosevelt had provoked Japan into attacking Pearl Harbor in order to get the country into the war against Hitler, because he thought there were enough peaceniks or isolationists, as they were called in those days, that he was never going to get the country to help England out. So he promoted this attack on us. 2,800 people were killed at Pearl Harbor, about the same number that were killed on 9/11, you see. So there is a precedent of a previous president provoking a war, and I kind of, in the long run, approve of what Roosevelt did because it worked out all right. And so I want people to see that this is not the same situation, you see. Nobody is threatening the United States like Germany was threatening England or Japan tried to attack the United States. I mean, this is a repeat of something that worked very well for Roosevelt, but I'm pretty sure is not going to work for George Bush. We'll see.
We will see.
Yeah.
All right. You've sort of mentioned this, but why don't we just do a little sum up? How would you assess the effectiveness of your work with Rocky Flats?
Well, I don't know how much I had to do with it, but we got to the goal that I was looking for, which was to get people upset about the dangers, and hopefully we'll avoid nuclear war. I mean, I don't think there's anybody who can threaten us enough to make it sensible to shoot a rocket with a nuclear warhead on it, you know, but then you never can tell. People can do some pretty stupid things sometimes.
Do you feel, in terms of the specific effectiveness, the specific actions like running for Congress, do you think that sort of got Rocky Flats on the radar screen in a way?
Yeah, that made the whole issue more newsworthy, so there was more discussion of it.
And did you remain involved with the protests through the 80s?
Some, yeah.
Have you been involved at all with the cleanup at Rocky Flats?
No, I've got a friend who's working out there, and so I know a little bit about what they're doing, but I haven't been there.
Did your work on the Rocky Flats issue change you?
Oh, yeah. I can't say exactly how, but I had run for the school board once before that, so I'd had sort of an interest in politics, but never had been anything in the way of a viable candidate for anything. So, I mean, I was president of the hospital, one of the hospital governing boards one year and things like that, but I think that was the easiest way to get this whole subject discussed, was to bring it into a political campaign. And Tim Wirth helped a lot because he was so nervous about losing the election.
So, is there any way you can describe what that change was in you?
Well, I got a little more likely to shoot my mouth off, which is both good and bad. And so I don't know. I can't say what significant differences it made, but I mean, I feel quite pleased that we got the place moved. And you know, now I wonder how many other times the government's lied to us, and how much danger we're in from this, that, or the other thing. I mean, you know, we're in big danger from overpopulating the earth. We have barely begun to figure out how to deal with that. I mean, we would have a stable population in this country if we didn't have illegal immigrants. But it's pretty hard to stop illegal immigrants, so therefore we won't have a stable population in this country. And maybe we can slow down places like India and China and Southeast Asia that are the fastest growing parts of the world. I don't know. But my kids pretty well stay away from politics. I've noticed that. Well, I shouldn't say that. No, I take that back. My daughter, who's 42, got elected to the governing council of Bingen, Washington, which is a town of 600 people. So maybe my little political efforts were behind that.
So did you feel that Rocky Flats politicized you then in some way?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I grew up as a kind of a traditional Republican like my friends and my parents, and then I was a Democrat for a while, and then I became a Citizens Party member and then a Green Party member, so I'm still looking.
So it's been a voyage then?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think were the best, worst, or most interesting things about your involvement with Rocky Flats?
Well, I got more interested in public affairs in general. That was one of the good things. And you know, I kind of lost a few patients who were pro-Rocky Flats or who were Rocky Flats workers, but I gained as many or more others who were anti-Rocky Flats. So it's not that big a deal. It's my general impression. I mean, gradually the whole community got to about where I'd gotten to by 1980 or something. I mean, maybe because we have so many nuclear weapons that, you know, we don't know what to do with them, maybe that preserved the peace. I don't know.
What do you think?
Well, it became clear to a lot of people that any war was going to wipe out a majority of the population in the countries who were at war. And so you have to go back to when they made the first atomic bomb to see how everything has changed in the way of war since then. And I mean, I'm mildly optimistic that we won't ever go to war again, which is why I just couldn't believe it when we fought against Iraq for 2 weeks or something, you know. Hopefully that's the end of it, but maybe not, you know.
Do you, would you be happy with doing away with all nuclear weapons if we had, you know, got rid of the arsenal? I don't know where we put it, but I mean, is your vision a world without any nuclear weapons?
Well, I never really think about that. It's too unlikely, I think. I'm not as idealistic as some people are. We have a lot of dangers like hurricanes and tornadoes and famines, and nuclear war is just probably the most serious of all the possibilities. And with the Russians splitting up and dividing their country into small countries, then that whole risk has disappeared. And now we wouldn't get nuclear war unless some idiots provoked it somehow or other.
Did you think, how did you feel during the Cold War? Did you feel that they were necessary? Nuclear weapons were necessary?
Well, you know, it's just been recently that the publicity has been to come out that Japan was ready to sue for peace, or whatever you call it, even before they had atomic weapons dropped on them, you see. I mean, for a long time I thought that that ended the war, but probably the war would have ended within a few weeks or months if we hadn't have dropped them. And if we hadn't have dropped them, then who knows where we'd be, you see. But we could have gotten along just fine without them. But, you know, you can't ever stop people from discovering things or yeah, I mean, we're even getting some benefits out of nuclear power, and it's probably worth it. But, you know, you can't say we never would have done some of these things, you see. I mean,
See if I have any more questions. We've pretty much covered it all. Are there any stories that you remember that you'd like to share, or any other?
no, I've got some paper to give you. You can put in with your files, but my memory's not as good as it used to be, so 5 years ago I might have had a story.
Well, if you remember one, I can always come back.
No,
Live
no,
nearby,
no,
so.
never mind.
But
As you can see, I'm not really loquacious, and so I'm not that different than all the other people involved in this whole thing. I was just a little more eager to publicize the dangers of nuclear weapons than most people were, and I picked a way that was available to me.
I hear that you used to wear a Revolutionary War costume.
I've got a three-cornered hat and an old musket, and that always gets a little attention when I wear it. Yeah, you know, I kind of got to enjoy the publicity of being eccentric. But, I mean, you have to have reasons for doing that you think are important enough to make a fool of yourself. And it's funny how those things affected my career, because Boulder always had a lot of doctors, and I went off to teach in a medical school in Kansas City from '76 to '78, year and a half, and a lot of those things affected my practice, so gradually I just got less busy and less busy until I retired. But I certainly don't have any regrets. I'm kind of proud of the whole Rocky Flats protest effort. And now I keep thinking, how are we going to get the government to tell the truth? And why in the hell would George Bush provoke that attack on the country on 9/11, you see? I mean, there's just too much we don't know, and we'll figure it out gradually, I guess. Just the fact that Roosevelt provoked Pearl Harbor and George Bush provoked 9/11 is going to provide a reason to get everybody to think about that.
I guess the trick is to get the attention
Yeah.
of people, which is
Yeah. Well, there is a tendency for people to not pay attention, you see, and to want to be dumb. I mean, you have to do something once you become aware of how bad things can be. And less people vote, and less people want to do things. So, you know, television has become a big problem, and people don't read as much, and I don't know. I could become a grouchy old man. That wouldn't be very difficult.
Any chance I could get you to show me your Revolutionary War?
Oh, I'll dig it out, sure.
Okay, let me turn this off for a second, and we could put a different microphone on so I don't have to have you clipped on.
You like that, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I get a lot of comments about that.
See if I can. This is going to be a new. Okay, well, you're going to have to tell me. Here we go. I want to turn it sideways so. Aha. There we go. Okay. Why don't you tell me where you got it?
Well, this goes back to 1976 and the bicentennial, you see, and there were a lot of people wearing costumes from the 1776 era, so, I mean, I got it at some store, I don't even remember where, and, but there were a lot of costumes like this in 1976.
And when did you start wearing it for your political appearance?
Yeah, in 76. I mean, I got it then because it was easily available, and I forget where I got it, but probably a secondhand store or something.
And what's the message that you hoped to convey?
Well, we need a revolution in this country, that's for sure. And my version of how it should be would be different than a lot of people's, so I'm not sure that a revolution will automatically make things better. But just the fact that not that many kids read, not that many kids finish high school. I mean, in a sense, we're struggling with immigrants more than we ever have before. But even the people that are bright and run things are still willing to destroy the environment. So, I mean, a guy like Henry Ford, who was a great hero, has been dead long enough that nobody thinks about it anymore. Excuse me a minute, I gotta answer the phone.
Okay, we're good.
Okay. In the early 1960s, I forget exactly when, Henry Kemp, the head pediatrician at the medical school in Denver, did a study to show child abuse was preventable. Child abuse causes a lot of trouble. Most craziness is probably a result of child abuse, and there's all kinds of problems with it, crime, etc. Well, Henry Kemp had the idea that if you could stop mothers from abusing their kids, it would help people in general. So he and some of his colleagues did this 100 families who were likely to be abusive because the mother didn't want to handle her baby at the time of birth. See, that's pretty stressed or pretty antisocial to not want to handle your baby. So in 50 of those 100 families, they sent these 2 young nurses out to visit the mothers every week. And they had a woman pediatrician call the mothers every week when they had phones. So when they did that, there was no abuse in the 50 families that they were visiting, but in the other 50 families, the control group, 5 kids had to be hospitalized for injury. Mm-hmm. So I heard a guy from Denver talking about this in the late 70s, and I asked him, what changed in Denver when you learned how to prevent abuse? He said, nothing changed because our grants ran out. Well, I'd been into agitation, or whatever you want to call it, enough to know that we've got to solve child abuse, you see, that because that's behind most craziness and most crime. So one of the nurses who'd been doing those visits for Henry Kemp in the early 60s was working for the Boulder County Health Department. So we got programmed. We had citizens meetings. We met for a year talking about what to do about this. A mother and her boyfriend had killed her son in 1983. And so we talked about this at public meetings for a year, and we started 2 programs. One was run by the health department called the Community Infant Program, and they have, I think, nurses visiting new mothers. And they went from like 30 mothers a year to a couple hundred mothers a year. And I think we have a little less than 4,000 babies born every year in this county. So we're kind of doing that. And then we started a parenting center where mothers could bring their kids and meet other mothers, because if you just select something out for the worst mothers, you've scapegoated them. And so we've got a community parenting center, which is now called Parenting Place, where mothers bring their kids and meet other mothers. And like, we've got a group of Japanese-speaking mothers and Chinese-speaking mothers and French-speaking mothers who are bringing their kids, and they're all coming in together so they can talk their language with other people, and their kids can learn their native language. And I forget how many people come in every year. Of the 3,800 babies that are born, probably 1,000 or so come to the parenting place. And so this is something that I'm really interested in, and something that I think that there are other parenting programs going up around the country, and they're not coordinated. It's like we kind of communicate with each other just because we hear about it by happenstance. And I got involved in the Journal of Psychohistory, and that's how I was thinking about this kind of stuff. And so they have an annual convention, and there's some people. I'm going there to give a paper in a couple of weeks, and there's some people from San Bernardino, California, coming to hear my paper and to learn more about how to start a parenting program at their town. And so this has got me as interested as preventing nuclear war ever was. And, I don't know, maybe sometime you can come do some television tapes of the parenting programs.
Sure. Do you see any similarities between your involvement in this and your involvement in Rocky Flats?
Well, yeah. I mean, preventing nuclear war was a significant goal, and preventing crime and craziness is an equally significant goal. And so it's... I'm not quite as good a salesman and recruiter as I could be for these kinds of efforts, but I mean, I've got enough friends who get interested.
One question I wanted to ask you while you still have your hat on, but I'll ask you now is, I wanted you to tell me the significance of, what the costume signified specifically to your involvement with Rocky Flats. You mentioned freedom and revolution.
Well, going against the government is revolutionary. And that's how we got separated from England, which is what the Revolutionary War was about. And so the government makes mistakes, and fortunately, nuclear war doesn't look very likely. So maybe we've avoided that disaster. I mean, we've got some others coming, like too many people and other things. So we have to continue to be a little smarter than we normally are.
All right. Did you want to show me some of the
Oh,
stuff?
no, it's just, I gave you a couple of clippings.
Okay, are there any other ones that...
Here's a paper I wrote. I don't even remember why I wrote it. But I'll give you a copy.
Okay.
Yeah. Take this along and bring it back someday. It just kind of covers what I've been telling you.
Okay. And can I make a copy of it?
No, you can just have that.
Okay.
I've
You
got
want it
one.
back? You have another copy?
I've got another copy.
Okay. Great. Yeah, I can make copies of whatever you want back as well.
Well, I've got some other things that I can give you.
Coming over here.
Oh, I guess I gave you most of the important stuff.
Yeah, I can always just write down the newspaper clips too and find them in archives and stuff. So. Okay.
Okay.
Are we done?
Yeah.
All right.